The storm did not arrive suddenly. It announced itself the way most storms did in the early months of 1916. First, as a pressure change, noted only by instruments. Then as a dull restlessness in the air. Men who worked outdoors later said the wind felt held back, as though something larger was gathering before being allowed to move. In the spring of that year, a small government weather station operated on the outskirts of Cheyenne, Wyoming, one of several regional posts tasked with monitoring pressure systems moving east from the Rockies. The station was unremarkable: a low timber building, a fenced instrument yard, and a narrow telegraph line that connected it to Denver and Omaha. Its staff numbered 4. The senior observer was Edgar L. Whitcomb, age 53, a former railroad surveyor who had joined the U.S. Weather Bureau in 1898. With him were 2 junior assistants, Thomas Rook, 26, recently trained in St. Louis, and Henry Callow, 31, a farm boy turned instrument reader. The final man, Samuel Ives, handled telegraph transmissions and log duplication. Their work followed routine patterns: barometer readings at fixed hours, wind direction and velocity logged by hand, cloud types identified using standardized charts. Every observation was written twice, once in ink, once in pencil, then transmitted by wire. By all surviving accounts, the first half of April passed without incident, but the logs from April 17, 1916, show a deviation not in the numbers themselves, but in the margins. Whitcomb, known for strict adherence to format, added brief notes outside the ruled columns, words that did not belong to any official category. At 6:10 p.m., beneath a routine pressure reading, he wrote, "Cloud mass, unusually consolidated. Movement, inconsistent with prevailing wind." No alarm followed. No special alert was issued. The men ate their evening meal as planned. Beans warmed on a coal stove. Coffee boiled too long. Rook later recalled the silence not uncomfortable, just prolonged. Outside, the sky had darkened into a uniform gray, lacking the layered structure they were accustomed to classifying. Shortly after 7, Callow noted that the anemometer cups were spinning irregularly, exploding, slowing, then stopping altogether, despite visible movement in the grass beyond the fence. Ives checked the telegraph line for interference, but found the signal clear. Whitcomb instructed them to continue observations. By 8 p.m., the cloud ceiling had lowered dramatically, not in bands or rolling waves, but as a single mass descending evenly. Rook recorded the cloud type as nimbus, then scratched it out and left the space blank. In his personal notebook not the official log, he later wrote a single sentence: "It looks less like weather and more like something being carried." At the time, no one said such things aloud. Weather stations were places of measurement, not interpretation. The men had been trained to describe, not to imagine. And yet, as the light faded and the wind shifted against itself, each of them would later admit to the same quiet sensation: that the storm forming above the plains did not behave like systems they had studied. Not yet threatening, just deliberate. The first drops of rain did not fall until nearly, and by then, Whitcomb had already drawn a small circle in the margin of the logbook, something he had never done before, and never explained afterward. The rain began without rhythm. According to the station log, the first drops were widely spaced, striking the tin roof with enough force to be heard clearly indoors, yet falling too infrequently to register as steady precipitation. Whitcomb noted the start time 8:47 p.m., then paused before writing the intensity. The space remained blank. Outside, the instrument yard was fully visible under the station's single arc lamp. Callow, tasked with confirming rainfall, stepped onto the porch and stood there longer than necessary, watching the drops strike the packed earth and disappear without pooling. He later said the rain did not fall in the usual sense. It came down straight, he told a local reporter months later. Not slanted, not driven, just straight, like it had been released. At 9:05, the barometer showed a sharp but brief fluctuation downward, then back to its previous reading within less than a minute. Rook checked the instrument twice, suspecting a mechanical fault. He found none. Whitcomb ordered a manual cross-check using the spare aneroid kept inside the cabinet. Its needle matched the original reading exactly. No explanation was offered. Then the telegraph key clicked once, sharply without being touched. Ives looked up at the sound. The line had not received any incoming signal, and there was no outgoing transmission scheduled. He tested the circuit. The line was clear. No bleed, no weather interference. The click was logged as line noise, though. Ives would later cross out the phrase and replace it with single impulse. By 9:20, the wind shifted direction 3 times within 10 minutes. Each change contradicted the movement of the cloud mass overhead, which continued drifting east at a steady pace, unaffected by surface conditions. Rook attempted to chart the pattern but abandoned the effort when the vectors refused to align. It was Callow who first mentioned seeing something within the storm. He did not use dramatic language. He did not raise his voice. Standing near the window, watching the illuminated clouds pass beneath the station lamp's reach, he said simply, "There's a darker part moving against it." Whitcomb joined him. The others followed. At first, they saw only uneven density, a thickening of cloud within cloud, not uncommon during heavy systems. But the shape persisted, maintaining its outline as the surrounding mass shifted around it. It did not rotate. It did not disperse. It moved laterally. Whitcomb instructed Rook to note it as a localized density variation. Rook hesitated, then wrote, "Internal opacity, moving independently." At 9:41, the rain stopped entirely. Not gradually, not thinning. It ceased, as if cut off. The silence that followed was remarked upon in 3 separate accounts. The wind dropped to nothing. The anemometer cups hung motionless. Even the distant sounds of the rail, yardnarly audible at night, seemed muted. For nearly 2 minutes, nothing changed. Then the barometer dipped again, this time holding steady at the lower reading. Whitcomb drew another mark in the margin. Not a circle this time, but a short vertical line. No one spoke. They returned to their duties, each man aware that the observations no longer fit the categories they had been trained to use. Rational explanations were considered temperature inversion, electrical disturbance, upper level, shear, but none accounted for the consistency of the shape or its persistence within the storm mass. At 9:58, Ives attempted to transmit a routine update to Denver. The line accepted the signal. The reply, when it came, contained only 3 characters and recognized, unassigned, and repeated twice before the connection dropped. The storm continued moving east, and the shape within it did not fade. By 10 o'clock, the storm had settled directly over the station. This, in itself, was not unusual. What troubled Whitcomb was the lack of progression. Pressure systems of that size typically advanced with measurable consistency. Yet the readings suggested the mass had slowed almost, halted while maintaining its internal movement. The barometer held steady at the depressed level. Temperature dropped 3 degrees within 15 minutes, then stabilized. Humidity readings fluctuated without pattern. Rook remarked quietly that it felt like waiting, though he could not later explain what he meant. Outside, the cloud ceiling appeared lower than before, but not in a threatening way. There were no towering formations, no lightning, just a broad, dim canopy pressing down on the plains. The arc lamp illuminated only a narrow portion of it, but within that light, the darker region was still visible, its boundary clean, its motion controlled. It was no longer drifting laterally. It was circling. Callow timed the movement using the station clock. The shape completed a slow arc roughly the width of the yard in just under 4 minutes, then repeated the path, maintaining the same distance from the ground. It neither descended nor rose. Whitcomb instructed him to stop timing it. "This is not a phenomenon we can measure," he said, though his tone lacked authority. At 10:17, the wind returned, but only at ground level. The grass bent sharply eastward. The station flag snapped once, then fell slack again. The anemometer spun briefly, recorded a gust, and stopped. Above, the cloud mass remained undisturbed. Rook attempted to classify the formation using the Bureau's cloud atlas. He found nothing comparable. The closest reference to shelf cloud did not apply. Shelf clouds advanced. This did not. The telegraph line clicked again. This time, the sound repeated 3 short impulses, evenly spaced. Ives did not touch the key. He logged the time and wrote nothing else. At 10:31, the darker shape altered its path. Instead of circling, it elongated, stretching briefly into an irregular form before contracting again. Callow described it later as adjusting, though no such word appeared in the official record. Whitcomb ordered all observations to continue as normal, yet the logs from this period show handwriting changes. Pressure numbers written heavier than necessary. Wind direction corrected multiple times within the same minute. One temperature entry overwritten so forcefully that paper thinned. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not wind. A low, continuous resonance. Felt more than heard. Like distant machinery operating underground. Rook placed his hand against the window pane and felt a faint vibration. The glass did not rattle. The instruments did not respond. The sound persisted for approximately 90 seconds. When it stopped, the darker region within the cloud mass was closer now, directly above the instrument yard. Whitcomb stepped outside despite the others' protests. He stood beneath a lamp, raincoat buttoned, looking straight up. The cloud cover was dense, but within it, the shape was visible as a deeper absence of light, its outlines sharpening as though the surrounding cloud were thinning around it. He remained there for nearly a full minute. When he returned inside, he removed his hat, set it carefully on the table, and said, "Only make note of proximity." At 10:49, the rain resumed. This time, it fell unevenly heavy in some areas of the yard, absent in others. The rain gauge recorded accumulation, but Callow observed that water struck the glass of the lamp enclosure without leaving streaks, as though surface tension behaved differently within the storm's interior. No one attempted further explanations. The shape remained overhead, and for the first time that night, the men began to understand that whatever they were recording was not passing through, it was staying. The barometer needle, which had held steady for nearly an hour, began to oscillate, small movements at first, then wider swings. He found none. The darker region above the yard no longer circled, it descended. Callow noticed it first. He said nothing, only stepped back from the window. Rook followed his gaze and saw that the boundary of the shape had sharpened again. Its underside now distinctly closer, compressing the illuminated cloud layers beneath it. The distance was impossible to judge, but its presence felt immediate, no longer part of the broader storm, but separate from it, contained. At 11:18, the telegraph line activated on its own. The key depressed fully and held. Ives rushed forward and pulled his hand back as if burned. The metal was warm, noticeably so despite the cool air inside the room. The circuit emitted a steady tone, unbroken, until Whitcomb disconnected the power. Silence followed, heavier than before. Outside, the rain stopped for the second time that night. This time, it did not stop everywhere. Beyond the fence line, lightning briefly illuminated the plains far off. Diffuse, illuminating distant cloud banks that continued to move eastward. But directly over the station, the storm had gone still. A pocket of calm, sharply defined. Within that calm, the sound returned. Stronger now, the low resonance filled the building, passing through walls and floorboards without vibration, as though the air itself were carrying weight. Rook later wrote that his chest felt pressed inward, though his breathing remained normal. Whitcomb ordered the instrument cabinet opened. Inside, the mercury thermometer had separated its column, broken cleanly in two. The maximum thermometer showed a sudden spike, not reflected in any previous reading. The hygrometer needle was buried against its stop. None of the instruments were behaving independently. They were responding together. At 11:26, the shape lowered further. Its outline was now unmistakable, not defined by edges, but by absence. A region where light failed to scatter normally, where cloud texture flattened into a uniform void. It hovered directly above the rain gauge. Callow dropped his pencil. No one told him to retrieve it. Whitcomb stepped forward, opened the station door, and stood on the threshold. The air outside was unnaturally still, cool, but not cold. There was no wind on his face, no rain on his coat. Above him, the shape paused. For several seconds, long enough to be marked later as an interval rather than a moment, it did not move. Whitcomb raised his hand slightly, perhaps to shield his eyes, perhaps without intent. At that instant, the resonance ceased. The darkness above the yard contracted sharply, drawing inward upon itself. The surrounding clouds surged to fill the space it vacated, collapsing in a way none of the men had seen before, not outward. The pressure inside the station dropped so suddenly that Rook's ears rang. Then the storm resumed its motion. Wind returned from the west. Rain fell evenly across the yard. The cloud mass lifted, rejoining the larger system moving eastward, indistinguishable now from the rest of the sky. The shape was gone. Whitcomb remained outside for several seconds longer, then stepped back in and closed the door carefully, as though sealing something out. He did not speak. Neither did anyone else. At 11:41, he wrote a final line for the hour. Disturbance concluded. Cause undetermined. But beneath it, so faint it was nearly missed, he added a second note, smaller than the rest. Proximity observed. The storm continued east. The men stayed at their posts, and none of them believed it was over. The remainder of the night passed without further incident. The storm system continued its eastward movement at a normal pace, dispersing gradually as it crossed into Nebraska. By 1:30 a.m., the sky above the station had cleared enough for stars to appear in thin, uneven patches. Wind readings stabilized. Pressure normalized. The instruments, one by one, returned to expected behavior. None of the men left their positions. Whitcomb ordered continuous logging until dawn, despite regulations allowing reduced observation after midnight. Every hour was recorded in full. No margins were used. No annotations added. At 3:00 a.m., Rook requested permission to step outside. He later said the station felt too close. Though the temperature inside remained consistent, Whitcomb agreed, but instructed Callow to accompany him. They walked the perimeter of the instrument yard slowly, lantern held low. The ground was wet but undisturbed. The rain gauge stood upright, unbent. No marks were found in the soil, no impressions. No scorch, no residue. The grass beneath the arc lamp appeared flattened in a circular area several feet across, but recent rainfall made it impossible to determine whether this was unusual. Callow suggested it might be wind-related. Rook did not respond. Inside, Ives attempted to re-establish routine telegraph contact. At 3:14 a.m., he successfully transmitted a standard weather summary to Denver. The reply came back clean, uncorrupted, and without delay. No mention was made of the earlier interruption. Still, Ives added a private note to his personal ledger. Line responsive again. No explanation for prior activation by morning. Exhaustion set in. Handwriting grew uneven. Entries shortened. Whitcomb's normally precise script slanted slightly to the right, a detail later noted by archivists reviewing the logs. At 6 a.m., a relief observer arrived from town, surprised to find all 4 men still present. Whitcomb gave a brief verbal summary on remarkable weather irregularities. Instruments requiring inspection. Nothing more. Later that day, Whitcomb submitted a supplemental report to the regional office. It was concise and restrained, citing pressure anomalies, localized calm, and telegraph interference. The report made no reference to shapes, movements, or internal cloud behavior. Rook, however, wrote a letter to his brother in Missouri. The letter survives only in part, preserved among family papers. In it, he described the storm as wrong in arrangement and noted that the sky behaved with intention. Though I know that is not proper language, he did not send the letter immediately. The postmark shows it was mailed nearly 2 weeks later. Callow told no one. According to his wife, he stopped looking directly at storms after that night. When thunderheads gathered on the horizon, he would busy himself indoors, citing headaches or fatigue. He remained employed at the station for another year, then resigned without explanation and returned to farming. Whitcomb requested a transfer that summer. The official reason given was health. He cited trouble sleeping and recurring pressure in the ears. His superiors approved the request without comment, assigning him to a coastal station where storm systems behaved differently predictably, it was said. The original logbooks from April 17th and 18th were archived as routine records. But someone no record indicates who had placed a small slip of paper between the pages. On it, written in pencil, were 4 words: "Not accounted for." No action followed. No investigation was opened. And as far as the Weather Bureau was concerned, the storm of April 1916 passed like any other measured, recorded, and left behind. Only the men who witnessed it understood that what remained was not damage, or loss, or proof, but a quiet, enduring uncertainty that none of them ever fully set aside. In the months that followed, the storm faded from official memory. Weather Bureau summaries for April 1916 list no extraordinary events in southeastern Wyoming. Regional maps show a typical spring system: moderate rainfall, brief pressure variation, nothing warranting special notation. The supplemental report submitted by Whitcomb was filed, indexed, and never referenced again, yet the primary records remained. Decades later, when archivists reviewed early 20th century station logs for a climatological study, the Cheyenne volumes drew quiet attention not for their data, but for their inconsistencies. Marginal marks, without legend, blank classification fields where cloud types should have been listed, pressure readings corrected, but never explained. One archivist noted the repeated phrase, "movement inconsistent," appeared 3 times in Whitcomb's handwriting across separate pages, saying unusual redundancy for a man otherwise known for precision. Rook's letter, preserved by his family, offers no further detail. In later correspondence, he never mentioned the storm again. By 1922, he had left meteorological work entirely, taking a clerical position with the rail service. When asked years later about his time at the station, he reportedly said only that some nights teach you the limits of record keeping. Callow lived quietly. He refused a request from a local newspaper in 1934 to speak about early Weather Bureau days, claiming his memory was poor. His wife later said this was untruth, that he remembered small things clearly, but avoided certain topics with deliberate care. As for Whitcomb, his coastal assignment produced no irregular reports. His later logs are immaculate, restrained, almost austere. There are no marginal marks, no annotations. When he retired in 1924, he donated his personal notebooks to a local historical society, except for 1 volume covering the spring of 1916, which was never found among his effects. The slip of paper discovered in the Cheyenne logbook, not accounted for, remains unattributed. The handwriting does not match any of the 4 men conclusively. It appears to have been written years later, using a softer graphite than was standard at the time. No follow-up notes accompany it. There are no later storms officially linked to the event, no warnings issued, no revisions to observational protocols. And yet, similar phrasing, quiet, careful, incomplete, appears sporadically in weather station margins across the Great Plains in the years that followed. Always brief, always unsupported, always unaddressed. Shapes are never named, only movements, absences, proximities. The storm of April 1916 passed eastward and dissolved into ordinary weather, as all storms do. What it contained anything at all, left no trace that could be measured, collected, or proven. Only a handful of men stood beneath it long enough to feel that the sky was not merely acting upon the land, but observing it, and that whatever was recorded that night was never meant to last longer than the moment it was witnessed.